Well, it's about time that we talk about some actual baseline like health and fitness standards. And I will provide links. These recommendations all come from like the CDC, the AMA, and some scientific studies. So these are all identified things. So I'll give you the link so you can read it over yourself and come to your own conclusions. Let's start off by saying that this is not advice, and I am not liable for the choices that you make, and obviously consult with your physician. One of the things that we should always understand is the scientific studies and recommendations are generally center of the bell curve kind of recommendations, and individuals may fall to one side or the other of the bell curve, and some do in fact fall outside of the curve. So always talk with an expert that you trust, who's willing to accept that liability and all of that. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's actually talk about some of these identified standards. All right. So the first thing I want to pick on is actually BMI, right? Everybody loves to pick on BMI. We all know that height and weight don't really correlate to any other things and blah, blah, blah. And why does the medical industry use them? And we know that there are confounding factors. Yeah, all that is true. But the medical industry still uses it. If they are being honest, it is basically if you are outside of the acceptable range, then more diagnostics needed, and that's about all it can tell you. However, they still do use it. There is kind of like a modern modification of the BMI because the old one used some less than accurate factors due to computational issues. So make sure that you're using whatever the updated formula is, but basically kind of between 19 and 30. Now, I think 25 to 30 is actually considered overweight, but with what we're talking about, generally the recommendations are as long as you keep your BMI under 30 without other confounding variables, you should be okay. With confounding variables, on the Iron Culture podcast, I do not remember the guy's name. I'll link the show down below. They did mention that if you have some confounding variables like high blood pressure and diabetes, you may want to edge down a little bit lower into the 20s on that on the BMI scale. But other than that, everybody, like the medical industry uses it, so you should at least be familiar with it. No, it's not great. And whatever. So let's just move on from there. So the next thing that we should be understanding is there is actually a waist circumference measurement, and this is not dependent on height, and some of that is probably to do with the fact of whether you're tall or short. There's not a significant enough difference in your bone size to actually impact, or even your organ size to actually impact your waist circumference. And because this is a fairly large circumference, you should be probably aiming for smaller than that anyway. But they say for men, your waist size should be under 40 inches. And then they have identified with the Asian population, it's actually even a little bit smaller with Asians, it's 37 inches. And then for women, 35 inches, and then for Asians, 34. Those are not small waist circumferences, and the shorter you are, the bigger that is going to look. So take that with a grain of salt as well. But the idea there is that the waist circumference actually is pretty important, because we are concerned about visceral fat around the organs seeming to be correlating to early mortality. So having that as a general idea, so if your BMI is kind of in the normal range and your waist circumference is in check, you're probably okay, provided you don't have other medically relevant issues. And then they've done some research, and I believe this one was a study. I don't believe this one was one of the big recommendations. But they found for men, having your body fat below 22%, and for women having your body fat below 35%, also helped with mitigating those size-related mortality factors, right? So you kind of have this three-tiered checklist of normal BMI, waist circumference, and body fat. And all of these are very doable for the general population, barring, relevant disability, injury, illness, that kind of stuff. 22% on men, unless you have very, very specifically favorable fat distribution, you're probably not even going to see a hint of abs there. 35% for women. Women just naturally have to carry more fat. It just is what it is. And they did find that fat-free mass itself, that's, your lean tissue, muscle, bone, connective tissue, that kind of stuff, having that higher is not correlated with early mortality at all, but fat mass absolutely is, which is why the fat, the waist circumference and the body fat percentage is actually relevant here. These are very, very doable numbers. 40-inch waist is not a small waist on a man. 22% is not particularly lean. So these are things that are really totally doable, barring actual legit medical issues. So these are things that we should be considering as far as body size and how body size goes. Basically, once you break through these, you are no longer at a size-related mortality risk. You may have other mortality factors, but you're no longer at a size-related mortality risk. And that is an important marker to understand, right? And so for those of you who do martial arts, for the fitness aspect, you should probably be making sure that you're not going over these boundaries. Now, we also have some guidelines for kind of cardiovascular fitness and even some strength fitness, which is a little bit more recent. And again, these are very, very, very doable goals. Now, the cardio one is actually just, this is a recommendation. I believe this is the recommendation from the AMA. Don't quote me on that off the top of my head. It will be in the links. But they recommend that you do 75 minutes per week of vigorous activity or 150 minutes a week of moderate. And then they said, for bonus points, up to 300 minutes a week, right? Which honestly it's not that much. And I understand for busy people, it can sound like a lot, but it's really not that much. We're only talking 2.5 hours for the moderate intensity exercise. So if you're going to martial arts class 3 times a week, provided that it's of moderate intensity, you'll probably be getting that in, right? Other than that, going for a walk, hiking, stuff like that, usually is fine. I believe the studied range is something like 8 metabolic equivalents, something like that, which is equivalent to walking up a few flights of stairs, with an armload of groceries a couple of times a week. So really not that big of a deal. Now, I will say this, I believe in some of the HIIT research, HIIT, high intensity interval training research, specifically looking at the Tabata protocol, showed that doing the high intensity interval training, you could get the same cardio benefits in 2 days a week versus the 3 days a week of moderate. But it does come at a higher fatigue cost. So, play that however you want. But that's a pretty easy goal to hit, especially if you're just engaged in just recreational activity. You should be able to hit that, not too bad. And then your strength goals, this is fairly new. There's a cool study that actually demonstrated that actual physical strength was independently associated, inversely associated with mortality. And those with the best outcomes had a 1.1 times body weight bench press, because of course they tested the bench press, right? And a 1.9 times body weight leg press. Keep in mind, leg press is not the squat. They're really not even, really relatable exercises. There are too many differences between them. Although as kind of a quick and dirty, I know one article that Greg Nuckols wrote years and years ago, he just said if you assume a 45-degree incline on a leg press, then probably a good ballpark would be like 70% of your leg press you should be able to squat. So if you're like me and you prefer squatting over leg pressing, then 70%, which is like a 1.33 bodyweight squat, so a little over bodyweight, right? These are very, very doable numbers, right? If you are, say, a 170-pound male, which is fairly common, fairly average, a 1.3 times, 1 1/3, bodyweight squat is gonna put you close to, that's gonna put you a little over 200 pounds, right? That's not that big of a deal, right? That's a fairly easy benchmark to hit. Again, provided there are no, no disabilities, injuries, illness in the way of achieving that. And again, the usual suspects suggest like 2 times a week, total body workout, and they just recommend the hypertrophy range, like 8 to 10 or 8 to 12 reps, something like that. You can do better than that, but honestly, like as far as generic recommendations for just making sure that you're healthy and not worried about any specific goals, that's fine, whatever. So when we're looking at this, these are not big, huge, hard goals to reach. But for a lot of people who are starting in on their fitness journey or their martial arts journey, they may be far outside of these goals. And if you're a trainer, like, take an idea of this first. Try to work people within these boundaries first before you set them on other goals, right? If you can set, little manageable benchmarks along the way, like, you just do better. So, right, having these boundaries just to get out of the kind of size and fitness related mortality range, just hitting these will get you a good start. We've discussed in the past where I think your actual like strength goals should be. I don't know if we've talked about cardio goals, but obviously, especially if you're in combat sports, you should at least have 3-minute rounds, because that's going to be your standard thing, right? Let's just round that up. Call that 10 good minutes of vigorous fitness in your gas tank, which honestly you can probably hit just within this, reasonable cardio range here. So honestly, like, even that is doable kind of within these guidelines. So that's kind of your quick and dirty on some baseline levels that you should hit. And this really is just those averages to get you outside of that fitness and size related mortality, right? You may have other confounding factors. You absolutely may have other confounding factors. Obviously, if you smoke, if you drink in excess, if you use other substances, those also have their own risk factors associated with them. If you engage in physically risky behavior, that has its own factors associated with it. So there are plenty of other things that can kill you. However, right, if you don't want your body itself to just fail because you're too big or too unfit, this is a starting point that's actually based on research in medical institutions that can help guide you in the right direction. And then once you hit these, then you can kind of decide, do I want to go further? Do I want to go, into a place that it is, stronger, fitter, more aesthetic, whatever, right? You can start making those determinations for yourself, but hit these first. And it's just a good general baseline to not put yourself at unnecessary risk. Like when we talk about fighting, one of the things that it comes down to is like the referee always says, right? Your coach always says, like, the number one thing is always win or lose, go out there and defend yourself, right? Stay in the fight, defend yourself intelligently, do your best. You can do that for your health too. And honestly, like, your bets just for making sure that you're not at extra risk for baseline mortality isn't that high. This is doable. So I'm going to end it there, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Hey, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, do all the other social media stuff. You can check out our other socials, as well as take a look at some of the merchandise that we have for offer in the links below. And if you happen to be in the Phoenix metro area, stop in, come in for a class, come in just to say hi. We'd love to meet you. Until next time, good journey.